second, they need to win that first semi-final game. So then they get to go back to New Zealand. If they don't play the grand final qualifier in New Zealand, I don't think they can win the grand final.
I often feel for fans of other teams, but you can't help but feel for the poor old Tigers fans because this would just leave them just feeling completely dejected, I reckon. Well, the poor old West Tigers just cannot keep themselves out of the news. We'll look at whether we think Adam Doueihi will still be a Tiger in 2027, or maybe even in the next few weeks. What else have we got, mate?
Mate, we talk about the Panthers and the Warriors just being a little bit off over the last month of footy. And will that loss to the Bulldogs on the weekend cost the Warriors a top 2 finish?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple of teams now breathing down the neck of the top 8. Will some of those teams at the bottom of the top 8 slide out, where teams like the Raiders coming home like a steam train, can they sneak in? Let's get into it. Poor old Tigers, mate. The fans must just be like, who was I talking to the other day? They said I just couldn't even watch it. Like, they just can't cope. Poor, they're going to need years of therapy, aren't they?
Yeah, it's an absolute train wreck, mate, and it's moving that quick, the story, that unfortunately by the time the listeners hear this, there would have been another bungled press conference and another couple of decisions made. So, I mean, hang with us because we're trying to keep up to date with it as quick as we can, but it's just been one miss after another. Obviously, going back to the Tigers not being sure whether Doueihi was going to get past his suspension, so names him on the extended bench. He passes. Benji says, we want you to play lock, and all hell breaks loose. So I can't remember it happening before. It quite possibly could have, but for a player to turn around, especially a high-profile player like that, like Doueihi's one of their more senior players. He's been with the club for a long time. He's on good money. For him to basically just walk out and say, well, bugger ya, I'm not playing, it's unprecedented. I can't recall it happening before, Hawk.
Me either, which makes me think there's got to be more to it. And you can't believe everything you're happening in the media, because so far over the weekend we've talked about, well, there's more going on, there's more layers to it. Dave Riccio talked about that. We've also seen a headline late yesterday that said there's no way it looks like that he's going to be able to stay at the Tigers. And then this morning, apparently they've had a clear the air meeting and everything will be good and he'll be back in the team. So it can't be all of those things. But what I would say is that I can't believe that he's just said, I'm not playing because you asked me to play a certain position. I would suggest that more likely the case is that he'd be concerned about perhaps a whole lot of different things. The one that seems most logical to me is, like, you want to bring in this young halfback. Yep, that makes sense. But why would you not trial him next to me, who's going to be there next year, instead of the guy who's not going to be there? And that makes a bit of sense. Maybe there's a whole lot of things going on.
Yeah, 100%, mate. For mine, that's exactly my point. If I had been Adam Doueihi, would have been. I think Benji thinking, what he's got ahead and what he's got to deal with, it would have been easy moving Doueihi to 13 than dropping Jerome into reserve grade, because that would have caused another media shit fight on the back of the last 6 weeks to go. But for him to do that, it's not good. You talk about potentially something else happening in the background. He's obviously managed by Isaac Moses, and no matter where Isaac Moses goes and who he represents, there's always some controversy, and there's always something playing out in the media. So I don't think you've seen the end of it by any stretch. It'll be very interesting tomorrow when Team List Tuesday drops, and to see where he's been named. And then, to your point, if he is going to be in the halves, how they're going to manage that. If he comes out and he's named at 13 and he plays, well, then he's just made a mockery and he's made himself look stupid after what's happened last week. So it'll be very interesting to see what plays out tomorrow and then in the media. But to your point, I've had text messages saying he's going to go to the Dragons. I've had text messages saying that he's going to the Bulldogs. Like the Perth Bears have been floated. Like, this is just absolutely chaos right now, to put it bluntly. But you'd feel, if I was one of the Tigers players, I'd feel a little bit ripped off. I'd feel a little bit dirty. They're still trying their best. Obviously, the season's gone for them, and they're not going to be able to make the semis. But for them to rock up the way they have and get absolutely walloped by the Raiders and not have Doueihi out in the field because he's got the shits with the coach, it's just not that team mentality.
No. Again, I'd find it hard to believe that's what has happened. So I'd say there's way more to it. But what is interesting is that where does this leave their rebuild? Because all of a sudden it's looking pretty thin. The depth has been tested and they haven't gone well. They're not going to make the 8. That's pretty much mathematically confirmed now too. They are in a massive hole. And where to now? Like, it was looking so positive only 3 months ago. And all of a sudden you're thinking, well, what does the future hold? Like, they've got a lot of good young kids there who will be better for it again next year. But if you look to next year now, particularly if Adam Doueihi does go, and as you mentioned, if Isaac Moses is involved, there's every chance that they are agitating for something. Well, then, yeah, what do they do then? It's I don't often feel for fans of other teams, but you can't help but feel for the poor old Tigers fans because this would just leave them just feeling completely dejected, I reckon.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, mate. It'll play out, continue to play out in the media. Even that farcical press conference this morning from the Tigers, it lasted all of 20 seconds, and basically it was nothing to see here. Carry on, guys. Doueihi's had the chat, and everything's all okay now. Well, that's bullshit. And if they expect the fans to respond to that or cop that on the chin, then they're just playing them for a fool. So I feel bad for the Tigers. I really genuinely do. I don't know, where this leaves them. Obviously, the Jerome money will get spent on some of the juniors, but they would have firmly expected Doueihi to be there for the next few years to help bring them through, especially some of these young halves that we've heard so much about. So they're going to go back to the drawing boards and figure out what they're doing with Doueihi and figure it out real quick. So they either need to pull him into line and make sure he understands that he's part of a team, or they got to flick him and try and fill a fairly large void on the back of Jerome leaving as well, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're here, we may as well talk about where he may land. To me, it makes no sense at the Dragons because of what you're building there in and around youth and the guys you've already bought. Because you can't play him at 13 at the Dragons. You've got too many. Too many high quality young fellas coming through there who are going to play that role. The Dogs. Again, that doesn't seem to make much sense to me either. They've got they've got so many players there that can play 6 and aren't really 7s. Well, I think Doueihi fits firmly into that camp. If you look at some of those other teams that might have the salary cap space, Para probably not. It does seem to really point towards the two new teams, or potentially someone like Melbourne, who are definitely in need of outside backs. So, interesting.
Yeah, I look, there's a lot to play out. Potentially, there's talk around Walker. He's obviously getting very old at South. So there's a little dig there. So it could be there. But look, I hope for the Tigers' sake, he's one of those players that you want to see him play his whole career at the Tigers. But there'll be a lot of fans out there that'll be pissed off with him. He won't get a warm welcome. I wouldn't have thought. I know they don't play at Leichhardt again this season, but Combank or Campbelltown, I don't know whether he'll get a warm welcome from a lot of the fans. If I was a Tigers fans, I'd be pretty dirty on him and pretty pissed off with him. So maybe it'll get to the stage where he won't want to be there or not. But don't think that this is going to finish, mate, anytime soon. I think this will drag out the media for quite a little while now.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I would put in there is that I heard Shane Flanagan talking about him, and he said, I know him reasonably well, and he's a man of strong values and integrity, and if there's something that he's called out here, like it more likely that is more than meets the eye, and quite possibly a line in the sand moment for the club where we go, well, we're we're not going to tolerate this and we're going to move in another direction. History will show where it lands, but it certainly doesn't look good for him or the club at this point.
No, it doesn't, mate. It certainly does not.
No. Okay. Now, the two teams that looked all but certain to sew up first and second place only probably 3-4 weeks ago now suddenly look like they've hit a bit of a speed bump, and maybe it's been something we've talked about a bit, which is that they're front loading their training and they are making sure that they're going to be ready to go at the end of the season. What do you think, mate? Are they made their run at the wrong time, or are they just foxing with us?
It's really interesting, Hawker. I dove into the numbers. The last month of footy, both Penrith and the Warriors are 2 wins, 2 losses. And to your point, they were so far ahead of the rest of the competition. It was just a lock. So in that same amount of time, the Roosters and the Sharks are 4-0 and are just coming. They look. There's still a lot of improvement, I think, in the Roosters, but they look, a little bit more hardened. The big thing that stood out for me on Thursday night for the Panthers Para game was just how slow and sluggish Penrith looked, especially in defence. They were so sharp and fresh and on at the start of this season. So, I don't necessarily think it's the big training load. I think it could be a combination of everything. We talk about Origin. Both teams were affected by Origin pretty heavily. The Warriors as well as the Panthers this year. Then you take into the fact that they've both lost a really key middle. So, we've spoken about Mitch Kenny previously, and then Jackson Ford for the Warriors had an absolute outstanding first half of the season. He was one of the 4 middles, and to the stage where we all thought he probably should have been picked for the New South Wales side. So losing both of those players is, in my opinion, had a huge impact on their defensive line, because they're two of those guys that really control the middle in defence. And then there is, that training, that bulk, make sure they're ready for September. So I'm assuming, that some of those Origin players have obviously had a bit of a lighten up, because it was a pretty big, intense, emotional Origin series. But there's other players, obviously, in the squads that they need to make sure are ready to go for September. So it's a big one to see how they're going to come out of this. We're expecting Penrith to start to get on a little bit of a go. And truth be told, I thought Para, I know we'll talk about the game later, I thought Para were bloody unlucky and probably could have won that game quite easily. And then, the Warriors really struggled against St George at home 2 weeks ago, and then went down to the Bulldogs this week. Now, hats off to Canterbury. It was probably their best performance all year from what from my opinion. Their 2 back rowers were back, Kikau and Preston, and they were huge on the edge. But the Warriors just didn't look like their normal self. So these next couple of weeks will be big for both Penrith and Warriors, just to see where they're at. They don't need to be winning games now. I know we'll talk about the Warriors in a moment about their top 2 finish, but it'll all come down to when they're winning games in September. But it just doesn't look like their normal self at the moment. And I'd love to know, being on the inside, what it is that's causing it for both teams.
Yeah, definitely concerning signs, but I think we've seen this before. Like, I think back to the 2016 season with the Sharks, where they went on that really long undefeated run, but then they lost 6 in a row at about this time of the year. And then what history showed is that that's exactly what they were doing, is that they were working really hard, and at never at any point did they worry about what was going to happen, because they just knew once the finals hit that they'd be good to go. And it was almost like they flicked a switch. Now, we're talking about 2 teams, one in particular, that know how to flick that switch, but the Warriors have been there or thereabouts on and off for a few years now, and their best year when they finished 4th, what was that, 2-3 years ago now? They know where, since Andrew Webster's got there, they know how to be primed at the right time. So you would imagine they will bounce back. Not 100% convinced at this point, so it'll be really interesting to see. Like you said, we'll dive into some more of those games later. Now, the other point we wanted to talk about this with the Warriors, we've talked all year, and lots of people have talked all year about getting them in a home semi-final the first week, and then if they win and then a prelim, that makes them very tough to beat. But have they blown that chance, you reckon, mate?
Yeah, this is a big one, Hawk. Again, 2 or 3 weeks back, this wasn't a possibility.
No.
It was just an absolute lock that the Warriors were going to finish second, and if they beat Penrith in that that game they've got coming up in a few weeks' time, that they could have actually even got the minor premiership. Now here we are; they're sitting in third spot, equal with the Sharks, and only 2 points out of the 4. So it's a very interesting situation that we've seen. And to your point, that home grand final qualifier for the Warriors, or being able to stay in New Zealand the entire final series until grand final day, is a huge advantage. Not only for them just to be in their own beds, their own gyms, their own environments, but also having the opposition having to travel over to Auckland. So it's a massive thing to have a look at. For mine, traditionally, over the last few years, you've needed 17 wins to get into that second spot. Which means they need to win 5 of their last 6. So not an impossible task. They've got a few easier games. The Titans, Broncos, South, Knights, Manly. So there's a few teams there that have had up and down form themselves. And then that big clash against Penrith in 2 weeks' time. So certainly not out of the question that they could get back on and win 5 of those 6. But for me, I think they desperately need to come. If they're not second, they need to win that first semi-final game. So then they get to go back to New Zealand. If they don't play the grand final qualifier in New Zealand, I don't think they can win the grand final. I think that's how big having to come to Sydney or, in the unlikelihood, come to Brisbane, having to come to Sydney 2 weeks in a row like that in big occasion is really going to be difficult for them in my eyes. Their away record this year is 5-4. Now, those 4 losses have been the Sharks, the Panthers, the Finns, and the Dogs last week. So it has been against top opposition, but that's what they're going to come up against in the semi-final time. So to be able to go away and win 2 weeks in a row in Sydney to try and win a grand final, sorry, Warriors fans, I know I'm going to cop a pasting for this all week on socials. But for me, if they don't finish the top 2, they desperately need to win that first game so they can go back to Auckland for a grand final qualifier for me, mate.
Oh, mate, that's a great point. I hadn't thought about that, because if they get to stay at home that whole time, plus get to soak up, if they happen to win the prelim, soak up all that adulation and be in their community that whole time without having to travel, that will be massive for them. Like, they'll just be absolutely primed. But if they have to go to Sydney, particularly if they don't win that first week, they're going to play, they get the home game the second week of the semi, so they'd still get that, but then they'd have to go to Sydney, then come back, and then go back for a grand final. That might just be a bridge too far. So, yeah, mate, I think you're right there. The one thing that really will give them a better chance is their for and against for both of those teams, Panthers and Warriors, is huge. It's got the massive advantage over the Roosters. But I tell you what, one team that I have finally coming around to get on board that maybe they are a realistic chance, the Sharks, they are coming home like an absolute freight train with their for and against, up to 160 as opposed to the Warriors 190. If they can keep blowing teams off the park like they have, that for and against really could come back to bite them as well. So really interesting times with that top 4.
Yeah, you're right, mate. The other thing, it's one thing to say the Warriors, you probably back them in to win 5 out of those 6, but the Roosters and the Sharks don't have that hard a run home either. They've got a couple of games during their last 6 that or 7 that are a little bit tricky, but their run's equally as soft or not as difficult. So it won't shock me to see a few of these teams go through now and probably only drop one game all the way in. So even if the Warriors do win out, that still may not be enough for them. So really interesting. Either way we go, these 4 teams that are at the top at the moment and probably look like they're going to stay in that way, it should be some cracking games of football come semi-final time, mate. I can't wait.
Absolutely. The other thing that comes into play now is the Finns suddenly come back into that top 4 conversation, because if you look at their draw, they've teams that will pretty much be playing for nothing. The Dragons, the Bronx, Seagulls, Eels, well, they've got the Roosters game, which will be massive, and the Titans. So while a few of those teams have found a little bit of form, they're still not going to have that motivation because they're not playing for a spot in the 8. that's a pretty favourable draw as well for them. If they can win 5 or even beat the Roosters and win 6 of the 6, it's starting to put pressure on those other top 4 teams as well.
Yeah, 100%, mate. Obviously, Izzy Katoa, he's down to come back in around 23, so he's still got a couple more weeks out. So he's going to be a big inclusion for them. Excuse me, mate. But this last week where they had the bye, and then with all due respects to the Dragons this week, I think that'll give them an opportunity to freshen up after that really hard Origin campaign. You know, they had 6 or 7 Origin players, and we've spoken about how big a task that would be for such a young club who haven't experienced that together before. So they'll get Jack Bostock back this week, and then Katoa back the week after. They're just about full strength then. They've got Ray Stone and Jake Averillo out, but both of those guys, with respect to them, would struggle to make the top 17. So Katoa's the big one, mate. They get the Dragons this weekend, get back into the rhythm of things. Katoa comes back, and then, it'll be a shootout, mate, to see who gets those final couple of spots.
Absolutely. Now, one of the key things around who wins the comp and how they get there is depth. And we're going to talk to Will about a couple of things around the data around that. So let's dive into that now. Good to have you back, Will. How are you, mate?
Thanks, guys. Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. A little bit under the weather, so apologies if any of our listeners happen to catch anything through the through the microphone. So,
well, Steve's joining you there too, mate. So if they're going to catch anything, they can blame him as well.
Excellent.
Today we're talking about a couple of things, but one of them around ruck infringements. Tell us a little bit about what you found there, mate.
Yeah, so this is just an update, I guess, on some earlier podcasts we had where I released a few of these numbers, but I was having a look at, I guess, splicing up the season into like, you know, a couple of sections. From rounds 1 to 13, the average ruck infringements per game were about 9 per game, and since round 14 till now, the average is 6.3. So we've had a decrease of about 30% there, Steve.
Yeah, that's interesting. We spoke a little bit on last week's episode around the shifts in some of the team's results. Obviously, the Panthers and the Warriors, have started to struggle, and then in the opposite direction, we talk about teams like the Titans and the Raiders that are starting to string some wins together. So it's very interesting to see how this progresses through the year. We're obviously going to have a chat about the Panthers later in the episode, but having some of the state of origin affected rounds, but then also this is all happening at the same time. So it's very interesting to see it be increased by 30% there. It just shows a little bit of inconsistency for mine with the way they started the season, and it just dragged on too long before they started peeling it back for mine.
Yeah, well, it seems to be that, traditional crackdown period that lasted a bit longer than it normally does, and like, again, I think credit to the refs and also credit to the game, but I think the fact that it's come down is a good thing for the game. It's I think we're seeing better games, coming up to the best part of the year. So certainly not arguing that it's come down. I think it's been a good thing. So
the only thing that I look at it and think, some of those teams that are now really on the surge, if it had been refereed like that consistently through the whole year, as it had been the previous 2-3 years, do they make the 8 in a canter? And is that fair? And I know if I was a supporter of those teams, I'd be pretty filthy. Even the Dogs now seem to be on a bit of a charge, and suddenly those teams around 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, they'd be hearing those footsteps coming, because maybe what we thought the top 8 would be will be very different if the trend continues.
Yeah, it's a good point around the Dogs. They clearly modified their game to be a bit more direct than around the ruck, and you definitely saw it on the weekend as well against the Warriors. So yeah, they've adapted on the fly as all good clubs, and good teams do, and and they're banging down that door now to make the 8. So it's a good point.
Yeah, so the ruck infringements, I imagine the speed of the game would have contributed to this, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago as well. But you wanted to talk about the number of injuries as well. Do you think there's a direct correlation? What did you find?
Yeah, it's a question I get asked, I'm a lot by my mates about, like the injuries, and obviously you guys as well. And look, I don't think there's any. I was actually talking to my best mate who's a South supporter, and he's obviously going through the wars with all the calf injuries and the hammies and soft tissues and whatnot. And I said to him today that there's so many. I think there's so many layers to to this particular topic of injuries. I remember when Jason Demetria was in his last year of coaching South, and he spoke a hell of a lot about the lack of resilience that his side showed the previous year. So he absolutely killed them in the army camp in the preseason. I think Cam Murray even said it was probably one of the toughest ones he'd ever done. Now, the question I ask myself about that is, when you're essentially trying to play catch up, or you're trying to put more kilometers into the legs, you're doing that as well with older bodies now, and whether or not they can actually keep up with that, I think is maybe a little bit of what Souths are going through at the moment. I'm looking at an analysis where, like, we can also look at the soft tissues related to not only the age of the player, but also the amount of, I guess, miles they're carrying, or their wear and tear in regards to games played, but also the amount of pre-seasons they've had. And this sort of leads me into my next topic about Steve. I think you'll remember. I think you'll remember this as well, Hawk. Remember a number of years ago when the RLPA announced a extension to the time off for our pre-seasons, or
Yep.
in the off season. I remember Gus and a couple of others were, like, really opposed to it, because it sort of didn't fit that narrative of, well, like, we need time to put kilometers into these guys' legs so they actually don't get these injuries.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering, again, I got no data to support this, but I'm just wondering whether or not that might be starting to rear its ugly head of, we're trying to find the balance of putting as many Ks into them as we possibly can to prepare them for the high end of games and the length of the season, but we're also extremely cautious of burning them out. So you're sitting in that no man's land zone.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one there, Will. It's certainly interesting. The other one you mentioned around players' ages, obviously now with the amount of science that goes into it, they're simply playing later and longer. So, some of these guys that are getting around in mid to late 30s now just wasn't happening 15, 20 years ago. Once someone got to 30, it was an anomaly that they were going to continue to play. So these days, you've got young fellas coming into the NRL expecting to have 10, 15-year careers and play well into their 30s. So you certainly make a good point there. The old sayings, the calf is the old man's injury. All those starting to get all those soft tissues. Look, there's certain injuries, like poor old Dylan Lucas happened. That's just rugby league. That's no matter what you're doing with the game, that's just going to happen. But you talk about things like, Harry Grant's hamstring that occurred on the weekend, poor old Tommy Turbo. There's a number of them over the last a number of Achilles injuries that have happened, back to Xavier Coates in the preseason all the way through to Hudson Young a couple of weeks ago. So you make a very good point, mate, around the potential load of these players. I did speak to Gags about this, because I can see, as we've spoken to in the episode around the Panthers and the Warriors with their training loads, potentially trying to upload now to get ready, freshen up for the semi-finals. And even them at the Q Cup level, there's a number that they have to hit each week in the kilometers. If they're coming back from injury, they have to get to so many kilometers in the legs before the health and science team will let them back on the park. So you can only imagine that going up again to another level with the NRL, that this has been calculated down to the nth degree. And to your point, if they're not getting that work into the preseason that they traditionally have over the years, that could be having an impact, because there's no doubt a pattern forming here that we're getting more and more of it coming into the game.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Achilles there, and like Hudson Young's obviously been the most recent one. And the funny thing about him, or it's not funny, but it's the interesting thing was he played 80 minutes every Origin. So he played, he played 3 games of Origin, the full 80 minutes. And not only did he just play like an 80 minutes, he was everywhere on the field at every single time. He was all over the place. But then he backed up every single game, I believe, and again played the 80 again for Canberra. Yep. And that's where, like, we saw it a little bit with Harry as well. Now Bellyache obviously tried to nurture him in by starting him on the bench. But the fact of the matter is, on top of everything that's already been said, then you got to throw in the fact that both of those teams, Canberra and Melbourne, need to win to make the 8.
Yeah.
So you're really pushing the envelope, and Hawk, I know that you would know a lot about this too, but there's that silent stress in your mind about how, you're putting on the fact that, okay, you're going to come on a little bit differently. So routines a little bit out. You've got to go out there and you have to win, as opposed to, if we lose, that's all right. There's always next week to catch up on that game. So again, I don't think it's any one thing. I really don't. And it's sort of annoying that there's no one thing, I'm sure, but it's definitely, I think, a combination of a lot of those things.
Yeah, like I've taken so many notes. There is so many different things. I heard the other day too that because during the Origin time, they get protected loads when they get back to Clubland, and then also in Origin, they have a lighter load as well. So they're sort of having a whole 6 weeks there where their loads aren't anywhere near what they usually are because they're playing extra footy. So that's definitely going to be contributing. And you mentioned that mental game. I wonder if there's an element of, they get told when they go into Origin, when you go back to your club team, you've got to be that best player and you've got to stand up. And then I'm sure when they come back to their club team at the end of the Origin period too, there's an element, whether it's directly called out by the coach or whether just within themselves they feel like they've got to hit that new standard. Now they're an Origin player, and for Hudson Young, now that he's an elite Origin player, given I don't know if he got the medal for the New South Wales team, but if he didn't, he would have gone real close because he was pretty much their best every game. Whether there's an added pressure there that comes with all of that as well. Yeah, it's really fascinating. That what you said about the preseason, and they're much older. I imagine now in the pathways that those preseasons are more intense than they ever were before as well. You mentioned Queensland Cup, New South Wales Cup. I imagine all of those systems now are being more professional, and so it would be a massive toll on the body doing it year in, year out.
And Hawk, I reckon that's a key thing as well to mention as well is by like, this is not an accusation against any of the clubs and their high performance staff, because as you said, I know a number of them and they're as equipped as they possibly can be in regards to being on the cutting edge and knowing the individuals in their team better than anybody else. They live and breathe this stuff every day, just like a coach does the X and O's. Like, this is certainly not having a shot at anyone there. They're all extremely good at their job and they all work extremely hard. And, one of those other things I mentioned was unfortunately, I think there is that element of luck or unlucky aspect of it. It's just one of those things. I mean, I think Cody Walker's a good example as well, about which got me thinking again, is he's obviously had a lot of injuries over the past couple of years, a lot of these soft tissues, hammies and calves. But whatever he's done for his last preseason, knock on wood to all the South fans, I hope this doesn't happen, but he's been excellent on this year in regards to his time on the field. So whether it's an individual attention to detail that's happening away from the complexes, like away from the centers of excellence, it's that $64,000 question, right?
One thing's for sure, if Cody Walker does get injured this week, the South fans will be coming for you, Will.
Yeah, it's on me. It's on me. Sorry, guys. I'm knocking on wood as much as I can. I'm hoping it doesn't happen. So,
really good. Just an interesting aside. I heard this story today. It's talking about Reg Gasnier and how a lot of people who witnessed him still say that he was the greatest of all time. He only played 125 games because he did a cruciate in his knee when he was 25 or something ridiculous like that. But he said the record was he's played something like 125 games and for 120 something tries. Like, unbelievable. But yeah, it's a massive difference between the length of the careers now, like hugely. Like the average age, you're usually getting towards their late 20s and they're starting to give it away because they had to go and do jobs and that sort of stuff. So the whole lot, the data of everything will be changing and they won't be able to keep up with it, I imagine.
Yeah.
You're spot on, mate. The human body isn't designed to play NRL, let alone, to your point around Hudson Young, to play 3 full 80-minute games of State of Origin. It's just not designed for it. It's as simple as that. So no matter how much they prepare for it, these things can happen. But it's a real interesting one. It'd be good, Will, to find out in next week's or whenever you can pull them together how the teams have gone with injuries and just that overall number compared to what it was last year and then even to the point of, we've seen the referees change the way that they've officiated games to see if that's any impact or not. Every year it feels like there's always more injuries than the year before, but when you dive into the numbers, it's about normal. So it'd be interesting to see if this year's any different. It feels like it while we're living it, especially for some clubs, the poor old Storm as an example, but it'd be interesting to see how that compares from an overall aspect in years gone by.
Well, ask and you shall receive, Steve. I actually knocked up a little bit of this earlier. I'll keep it really simple. So what I did is I went back and I had a look at the total amount of players that each team had used from rounds one to the current. I'm 21 since 2023, and this year, there's been a 30 to 33% increase of players being used.
Yeah, wow.
And we've still got 6 or so games to go.
So crazy.
we're well ahead. And again, what's the reason for that? I don't think anybody knows. Obviously, there's got to be something in there. But whether it's the intensity of the game, the bigger bodies, the better athletes, whether that has a significant change over the past 2 to 3 years, who knows? But the fact of the matter is that there has been an increase. And I think just under half the teams in the comp this year have already used more than they used last year.
Wow. That's a pretty telling aspect and goes again to show how big it is to make sure and how important it is to make sure that your top 30 has some depth there. We've seen even as far back as the preseason talking around certain clubs losing key players, and that just has a huge impact on their overall results. So to hear that half the clubs already used more players with 6 weeks to go is a big stat. That's huge, mate.
Yeah, and one of the and the other one was over the past 4 years, the average players used by the premiers the average is 29 players being used.
Wow.
So again, that'll make more sense when we get to the back end of the year, but yeah, that's the average of the premiers of the last 4 years.
Yeah, really interesting, mate. That was a cracker today. Just some other random thoughts. Just talking about the unseen pressure. I wonder how many of these injured people are players that have had repeat injuries. There's a certain stress that comes with that, and a fear of it happening again. But also, I look at some of those guys who have had repeat injuries. Wonder if there's a correlation between off-field issues as well, and whether that's part of the stress. Because Latrell being a good case in point, like he's had a lot of stuff going on away from the footy field. He cops an absolute barrage of garbage on socials, and there could be a whole raft of things that are contributing to it. So yeah, fascinating. Just keep you in work for many more years to come, Will.
Yeah, I think Tommy Turbo is another one that you can throw in there. The poor bloke. You know, he certainly goes into every game. I mean, there's no doubt he goes into every. I mean, how can you not? You know, how can you not be? I'm thinking about that hammy. You know, and it's a damn shame that like we aren't going to see the best of him, unfortunately. But the a sprint coach mate of mine told me that the hamstring is the victim. The hamstring's always the victim. So where's it coming from? That's a question I know that's been put to me from my mate who's a sprint coach, and he's a very good one. He's always said that the hamstring's the victim.
Fascinating, mate. Fantastic as always, Will. Thank you very much, mate. Looking forward for next week.
Awesome.
Cheers,
thanks,
buddy.
guys. Get well. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Well, thanks to Will. That was really interesting. For those of you watching on YouTube, that has to be one of the worst moustaches I've ever seen on poor old Will. So hopefully that continues to grow for him in the next couple of weeks.
That's harsh, mate. Kick him while he's sick.
Yeah, he was sick. He did well hopping on. I appreciate it. Look, some real interesting ones. Obviously, we've been tracking like a lot of the fans, the six agains, and he's smack bang on, around that round 12, round 13 mark, where we've seen a considerable drop-off, so almost 30% drop-off in six again. So that's a telling stat for me, and, could play an impact on the way some of these other clubs have been performing, good and bad. So that's an interesting one. And then for me, the other one was the amount of players being used. For half the teams in the competition already to have played more players than the entire season last year is a huge stat. So, we had a lot of top-line players get injured last week with Grant and Lucas, to name a couple. So hopefully for fans out there, we stop the injuries and we get on with some football for the semi-finals.
Absolutely. We'll have to get Will to check out the total number of weeks out too, because I think that would make for interesting reading. There's all well and good to say, well, we've used a lot because we've had a whole lot of people injured at one time, but like how many weeks out? Like it seems like there's a lot of less of those short niggling injuries and more of those sort of 4 to 6 is kind of the most popular saying, right? He'll be out 4 to 6 or offered longer as those injuries get extended when they don't respond to treatment. So, that will be interesting to see the sort of total weeks of players missing as well. So we talked earlier about the potential for maybe a team to sneak in the back door and make the 8, and the team that looks most likely at the moment, the Raiders, they are 4-0 in the last month, and they have got a pretty handy draw coming up, mate.
Yeah, they do, mate. I did some numbers. They've still got a buy up their sleeve as well, which will certainly help them. This weekend's clash is a monster. So they got Penrith. We've just spoken about Penrith, though. They don't look as sharp and as crisp as what they have the last couple of weeks. So it'll be interesting to see from a Penrith perspective how they come out. It's that game that they play down in Mudgee each year. The Miracle in Mudgee, as they called it last year, was one of the absolute games of the year. So we'll talk about that on Wednesday's episode, as surely will be the game of the round in our eyes. But that's a big clash for them. It'll also be a big clash for Penrith to see how they come out of it. But if they get the win there, obviously the Knights have just lost Lucas. They've just lost Brown. Ponga's touch and go with another soft tissue injury. So they're not what they were a couple of weeks ago. The Sharks will be a monster clash. And then they've got the two Queensland teams, the Broncos and the Cowboys. So by then, the Broncos are obviously season over already, but by then they could be planning their trip to Bali. And then they freshen up with a bye into the Cowboys. So, looking at the numbers, they need to win probably 3 with 4 and against, or 4 to absolutely lock them in. And I can see that happening. The other teams are in front of them. I think that 12 to 13 is going to be the mark. I can't see the Bulldogs. I've probably got them winning another 2. Manly, at best, they're going to win 1 gone.
Yeah.
So South is the big one. So they're on 10 wins. Obviously, Latrell's still hanging around with his injury. They're not sure when he's going to come back. Their draw's not the best, truth be told. They've probably got a couple of wins up their sleeve, but I can genuinely see the Raiders coming home like an absolute firecracker. We've spoken to Will around the 6 agains, and it clearly favours the Raiders, the fewer in the game. So they're looking good. They've got a number of games at home, but this one in Mudgee is going to be an absolute belter of a contest, but could really put a rocket up a few other teams if the Raiders can get the victory over the Panthers.
Absolutely. You mentioned the having less of the ruck infringements. They were one team at the start of the year that were just getting pinged ridiculously. They were giving away so much, so they were getting called out for their lack of discipline. But I just wonder whether that was just a completely different way of the game was set up. Because remember, Ricky Stewart in many press conferences was questioning the state of the game and what we're trying to achieve here. So it had clearly had a bigger impact on them than most teams, given how they would have trained in the postseason. We did talk about the potential hangover of how they got bundled out last year, but maybe again, like we talked about with the Cowboys the other week, maybe we're a bit unfair on them. Maybe it had a bit to do with just how the game it was almost unrecognisable. We were talking about at the start of the year. So will be interesting. But what we know is it's going to be a fantastic finish to the year. It's interesting. We always talk about the makeup of the bottom positions of the 8. Usually they're just cannon fodder and they go out first week. But it's making the 8's always a good thing, and it gives your fans hope for one more week anyway.
Oh yeah, bloody host, mate! You can't knock it. Our teams won't get anywhere near it, mate. They start their season for next year already. So the one thing I'll say about the Raiders that I think Ricky Stewart got wrong at the start, only for the simple reason he didn't realise what was going on. He was playing the 3 big middles: Horsburgh, Tapani, and Big Papa in the forwards, and now you've seen he's gone to, even Dane Laurie played a lot of 13 on the weekend and cut the Tigers to absolute pieces. We've seen Brayley play 13. Starling's played a little bit of 13. So I think he's adapted and changed the way the Raiders have played. So, if I'm a Raiders fan, if they can get in and jag 8 spot, I like my chances against a Rabbitohs or a Knights, depending on who finishes in that 5th slot. You never know. You're lucky in the big games, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's look at some of these games from the weekend. Now, we got called out on the socials about blaming Kalen for the loss because of the goal kicking, but it's reared its ugly head again for the Knights. I was talking to a good mate of mine this week who's a Knights fan, and he was talking about that sitter from Sandon Smith. That would have changed the whole complexion of that final 10 minutes of the game. Yep. They blew that one, I reckon.
Yeah, I think you're right, mate. And considering they lost Lucas and then Brown, 2 pivotal players and 2 players that have had huge years for the Knights, to see that they'd lost them and then continued to play the way they had and continued to, take the Roosters, who are a bloody good football team, all the way is huge. And that goal kicking's been so costly. If you look past the Knights, their results over the last couple of months, there's been a lot of close games, wins and losses. The last 3 weeks have been really tight losses. You add 6 points to them, well, they're coming equal second with the Roosters at the moment, and all 3 of those games could have quite easily been victories. As we've said, 2 of them were goal kicking. So even a few of their wins have been really close. So that's just the evolution of the way they wanted to play and them just getting better. So they're going to really do it tough without Lucas and Brown, though. There's no question. I've still got them winning enough to make the semis. There's still probably 2 wins in there for them. They've got a couple of easier games, but this competition continues to throw up some curveballs as far as the results go. So they've still got a bye. They've still got Manly and the Titans playing at home. And then they've also got the Broncos, and with respect to the Broncos, they could come out as well beaters, or they could come out looking like the Dragons. You just don't know what you're going to get from them. So I still think they're going to have enough wins in them to get themselves to the semis, but I just can't see them firing a shot now, mate, without Lucas and Brown.
Yeah, you might be right. It'd be good to see them get enough to get a home semi, because we all know what the Knights fans are like, and that'd be a spectacular sight to see that Marathon Stadium in full house and the colour there. But it might be a bridge too far for them. While we're on the Roosters, we can't walk past this game without mentioning them. The two massive positives, they just find a way again, and Cherry Evans, he's the field goal master, and James Tedesco, you mentioned this on the pod last week, a couple of games freshen up, he looked like a spring chicken, didn't he? The way he was ripping them apart.
Yeah, he did, mate. I'd kept a pretty close eye on it for super coach purposes, mate. I was actually really happy he got a couple of weeks off, because that was exactly what the team needed from a super coach perspective. But I think it's good for Tedesco. He obviously hadn't played Origin for a couple of seasons, so going through that series, as Will spoke about, with the likes of Hudson Young and Harry Grant, it's been good for him to have those couple of weeks off. So it'll really freshen him up for the run home. Look, there's been some knock on the Roosters from everyone, and I don't know what more you want from them than right now. They're coming second. They've only dropped 5 games all season, and most of them have been within reason and been respectable. They've had a whole new spine come in. Walker's and Tedesco had been there, but Walker hasn't played a lot of NRL prior to this season. He's still considered a fairly young halfback, and Cherry Evans and Robson coming in. I don't know what more you want from them. So for me, if they're doing this and still not playing to the best of their ability, if they can get it all to click, they're going to be hard to beat come semi-final time, mate. They genuinely are.
That's my only concern, is that they haven't had that consistency, and that's one of the things we question the Sharks on. They've found that now. And I just wonder whether they've got enough creativity in them at the moment. I know it's a new spine, but how long can you use that excuse for? Like, we're way down the track of this season now. And apart from Teddy ripping holes in them, did they create enough to suggest that they're going to be able to mix it with the top 4 teams once it comes to the business end?
Yeah, you make a good point. I think there's a really interesting game coming up in round 24. They play Penrith, but that's the week Penrith come off playing the Warriors over in New Zealand. So you get a bit of a glimpse on how these teams are going to go playing against each other, and then how they're going to go travelling with the potential of this New Zealand trip. We spoke about it earlier about how important it will be for the Warriors, but how much of a handicap it'll be for any other club going over there. So I think those 2 weeks, not only from a Roosters perspective, but the way those top 4 look, I think you're going to get a little bit of a snapshot on what we're going to expect in September. And these are the games that are on the calendar. We talked about the Panthers and the Warriors being a little bit sluggish. These are the ones they're setting themselves for. So I think you're going to get a lot of the Roosters over those couple of weeks, where they're going to come up against a couple of the big guns, and they're going to have the opportunity to really show us what they've got.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned before, looking at the Panthers game, you said Para could have won that game. I'd go one step further and say they should have won that game. We were actually dominant for big chunks of the game, and I think in the end it was just the class of the Panthers that got the job done. But it was also because we played dumb football, and for 2 chunks of time we had the extra man, and we just couldn't get good ball to actually set anything up and take advantage of the numerical advantage. In fact, at times it looked like they had the overlap, which is just mind-boggling. But there were big chunks of that game where we were dominant, and yes, we've been on the improve and had a couple of wins here and there, but we shouldn't be getting that close to the Panthers at this end of the season, and they're not. They're one of the concerns is we targeted Blaise Talungi on that their left edge and the attacking right edge, and he came up wanting a few times, so that's still a concern for them. And just the fact that they didn't look coming close to blowing us out of the park like you'd expect at this time of year.
Yeah, you're 100% right, mate. I think those two 10-minute slots where Jenkins and Papali were in the bin were the defining moments that Para just couldn't. At one stage, they couldn't get the football, but even when they did, they just weren't testing the defence well enough. Jenkins actually scored when Papali was in the sin bin. And when Jenkins was in the sin bin, he'd only come back on 1 minute, and Liam Henry scored his try. So it was almost the flip. It was almost Penrith went, okay, we're down to 12. We've really got to dial in here. And then they asserted their dominance. So, yeah, look, the poor old Eels just didn't have the class for me to be able to make it happen. But the effort and the bounce of the ball probably should have resulted in Parramatta winning that game. I thought, to my point earlier, Penrith just looked really slow in their defensive line. I thought there was no doubt Para looked quicker off the line and controlled the ruck for huge chunks of the game. It was just when Penrith had to do something, someone just stood up and did it, and poor old Para just weren't up to it. Certainly, that Blaze Talangi edge is going to need to get some plenty of focus. Casey McLean and Blaze are both young footballers. They're still learning. This weekend, KO Weeks on that side for Canberra. Regardless of what back row they put there, because there's a couple that are still coming back from injury. That's going to be the focus, right? Stewart, if we're seeing it, Ricky Stewart's seen it 3 weeks ago. So there'll be a monster focus on that. And Penrith are going to need to get that right if they're going to go on and win the comp, mate, because right now it's a big bullseye that everyone can see.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing you mentioned last week, we talked about the underrated players, and you called out Jack Williams. Well, he was one of the guys who actually went through that hole a couple of times and had a fantastic game. So he's going to be underrated for not much longer, mate, because he's certainly putting in back-to-back performances this year. The other sort of big game I wanted to talk about, the Cowboys and the Bronx. Cowboys are starting to look good. Like, I know the Bronx got done and the end of the season, but they threw plenty at them, and the Cowboys just kept coming.
Yep. Very impressed, mate, with the Cowboys. I know they're at home. Don't get me wrong, 2 tries all, but they just controlled the game. From the opening kickoff, they asserted their dominance. There was no question. It was almost feel like, that first kickoff for Origin. The Cowboys raced down and just belted him. And just kept going for that early part of the game. They just really inflicted their dominance. Taumalolo was huge. I thought he sort of outpointed Haas, especially in the first half. I thought he had an absolute monster game. And the Cowboys look really bloody good, mate. They've had 11 wins and still got to buy up their sleeve. So for me, with their run home, they're a lock for the semi-finals. And could cause some damage. I can't see anyone coming from the bottom half of the 8. No one's done it yet, and those top 4 teams look red hot. But if someone's going to do some damage, it's probably the Cowboys for me. They look like those forwards are got a little bit of mongrel in them, got a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and the backs can certainly score points, mate. Those young fellas, they've got talent to burn, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. And they did it without having Tom Dearden for the whole time, poor bloke. But it just shows that they're made of a bit of steel this year. So, really impressive. They've done great work there. We won't go through all these games, but you mentioned the Dogs. Were you not overly impressed by their win against the Warriors? You think that they can't be a genuine chance of making the back end of the 8?
Yes and no, mate. I was genuinely impressed with the way they played against the Warriors. I thought it was their best game all season by far. And probably in fairness to them, it's probably the best team they've put on the park as well. Kikau and Preston have been injured for huge chunks of the season, and they're so important to them. They're huge men. They both run really good lines, and it just takes the pressure off their halves and their middles, because they could do so much damage. So I thought they were really impressive. Don't get me wrong for a second. I just can't see, the Bulldogs being able to week in, week out. They've certainly gotten better as the less 6 agains have occurred, and it's gone back to last year's refereeing. That's helped. They got the Storm this week, which we don't know what we're going to get with the Storm. Harry Grant's out. Munster probably will be out again. They got a long list. But then they come up against the Roosters, the Rabbitohs, and they've still got the Panthers. So there's got some really tough games. It's not impossible for them. Don't get me wrong on
they're
9
done,
wins,
mate.
but yeah, they've got some tough games ahead, mate. So I think for the Bulldogs, I think they'll be disappointed with the way the season started for them, not the way it finished.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the Storm. I think they're done, mate. And the other thing that it says this game that the Bunnies beat them, that it shows that the Bunnies aren't quite up to pace either. Yeah, they're getting the win and they're in that sixth place, but they should have put the Storm away a number of times in this game, and they just injuries. Yes, that's cruelled them. But I just think that game puts the Storm season to bed for this year, which is, if it does prove to be Craig Bellamy's last year, that's a sad way for him to go out. But to me, it doesn't really shine a massive light on the hopes of the Bunnies for the rest of the year.
No, you've just summed it up perfectly there, mate. Yeah, the Storm are done, unfortunately. With the injuries, I was expecting to make a little bit of a run for it, but losing Munster and now Grant, they're talking Grant will be back after the bye, but that'll be far too late, unfortunately, for the Storm. And look, the Bunnies, to me, they're just lacking direction. They've tried a number of different halfbacks. Ashton Ward's played the last couple of weeks. But injuries or not, mate. Obviously, Brendan Smith has had a bit of a calf injury. Latrell's been a huge out for them. Whether they had direction or not before, at least they, went left, and Big Latrell was just causing havoc. So having him out's really hurt them. But to me, I just don't think they got the game to be able to do damage. If they do scrape into the 8, which I've probably got them right on that 8th spot. If they do scrape into the 8, mate, I don't think you're going to see them in week 2 of the semis.
No. I tell you, I heard an interview on Triple M with Keon Kalamatangi on the weekend. Mate, you've got an absolute ripper there. Like, he spoke so well, and he just sounds like a really great person, which every club wants, and that was what the guys interviewing said as well. Shane Flanagan in particular was high praise for how he carried himself as a young man, and it was good to hear Flano's still talking up the Dragons and saying, as part of getting him there, he said you've still got a great team there and they're well set up for success in the future. So it's a good one for you guys. What wasn't a good one for you guys was a game that you thought they might have been a chance, mate. Have they just run out of steam after having a bit of a crack for the last 6 weeks?
Yeah, I think yes, and then I also think that coming back from New Zealand, it's been a bit of a theme for the show that trip from Auckland to Sydney. So I think that wouldn't have helped. They threw everything they absolutely had at the Warriors, and the Warriors were just that little bit too good for them. So I think coming back home after that would have just really taken a toll. Will spoke about early in the season teams playing the next week after the Panthers or the Warriors have really struggled. And I think you saw that, a young forward pack went up against probably the best pack in the comp and gave it everything they had, and then turned up on Sunday at home against the Titans and just unfortunately didn't play very well at all. I don't blame the forwards. Moses Suley on the right-hand side was just abysmal in defence early in that first half, and the Titans just run roughshod over them. And before they knew it, was just too big a gap to be able to overcome. So disappointing for the Dragons, but the Titans again, they've been playing really well and they deserve the win, mate.
Yeah, well said. All right, let's get to Gags' power rankings. We've got some changes, mate.
Mate, he's got it now, as is the NRL ladder. So he's got Panthers, Roosters, the Warriors down to 3 on the back of their form.
First time they've dropped off that second ranking perch for a while.
Yeah, it is, mate. Yeah, so they're down to 3. Sharks at 4, and the Finns coming off the bye have kept 5th spot. I probably don't disagree with his 5. I think if you look at the ladder, they've been the best 5 teams for the year. So there'll be a little bit of a debate. I know the Warriors fans like to give their opinion on social media, so by all means get stuck into Gagan for dropping them down to 3. But at the end of the day, the Roosters have come out of that Origin series really well. They've won the last 4 games, and the Warriors are 2-2 with a couple of interesting weeks ahead for them.
Yeah, the only thing I would say, and probably against what I've been saying all year, but in terms of power rankings and what we've seen over the last month, the Sharks have got to be in that top 2 position because they've been the dominant team for mine. And not ashamed to say that I might have misread that one. And they're putting together some consistent weeks, and they have timed their run to perfection.
They have, mate. Yeah, it's been interesting with the Sharks. So years gone by, they've always been around that top 4 spot, and come to semi-final time, they've been bundled out the back door for a couple of years. So it's interesting this year. They seem to have built more rather than just come out of the gates on fire. So if they're going to continue building and continuing to get better, they could be causing a few issues for a few teams at the back end, because they have got plenty of points in them. Their draw on the way home is probably the softest out of any of the contenders. So they're going to rack up plenty of points, mate. And if the other teams can't go with them on semi-final time and it becomes a shootout, they're one of the highest. They've got plenty of points in them, mate, all over the park.
I don't know whether the ruling's been made on this, but it would be an embarrassment to the game if they get a home semi-final and we have to play down at Shark Park in front of 12,000 or whatever it holds these days.
Surely not, mate. The Chinese in the Leagues Club holds more people than the stadium does. So surely they can't play at Endeavour Park or whatever the ridiculous name they've called it these days. They're going to have to play out of Allianz at Moore Park, mate. Surely.
Showing your Dragons bias. It does make you wonder whether it's worthwhile building a stadium in that southern area to cater for a number of teams there. Like you could build something that was pretty central to the Sharks, the Dragons. I mean, the West Tigers are pretty much positioning themselves as southwest Sydney now, and even the Dogs to a lesser degree. But I don't imagine the state government will be in any hurry to be building something like that. But I think that'd be awesome to have a CommBank type setup for the south where teams could play at a purpose built like high quality stadium.
Yeah, mate, 100%. Obviously, Cogra, while it's still the greatest field in the NRL, she's seen better days. The old fella. So, yeah, and Shark Park, it's hard to call something an embarrassment, but just the amount of people you can fit in there. I know the locals love it. It's similar to Brookvale. They don't like to travel and don't want to go too far from home, but they'll definitely get a home semi somewhere along the road. If it's not week 1, it'll obviously be week 2 with the way they're going to finish this season. So I would be giving up all hope, and I'd be moving it to Allianz at Moore Park there, mate.
Yeah, and you showing your Dragons anti-Sharks bias there as well, mate.
Yeah, I'm quite happy for them to lose.
Oh, fantastic. Mate, I think we'll wrap it up there. We'll see everyone later in the week after we've seen the teams. Be some interesting lineups given what's happened in the last weekend of footy and a few off-field things as well. And we look forward to chatting with all of you then.
Can't wait, mate.